Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we are excited to have back on the show Brandy Williams, who is a Wiccan high priestess, a pagan magician, and a tantric yogini. She's also the author of at least 5 books I know, including 2 which we're going to touch base with today. An older book of hers, The Woman Magician, and her latest book, Cord Magic. I also want to mention a few more things about her bio because she's really fascinating. She is an elder in the Coven of the Mystical Herkaba, which was founded in 1984. She's worked with the Golden Dawn group Temple of Light and Darkness and with OTO, and she meets regularly with the Theurgy Forum, which brings teachers of Theurgy together in public conversation. She currently studies Sri Vidya with a private teacher, and she teaches at magical conferences in person around the country and virtually around the world. She's also a master gardener and lives with 2 partners, 3 cats, and a dog. So we're really excited to have her back on the show. We get her all to herself this time. She was on our special, as you will remember. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome again to our show. We're really happy to have you guys here. We've got a couple of great guests still coming up this month. Next week, we have Dr. George Schwimmer coming back, Krista's dad, and he's going to be doing the second part of Doppelganger. He'll be looking at his theories about whether JFK was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald or whether it was an impersonator. And so that's really always fascinating to have him on. And then at the end of the month, we have Jason Miller, who's an incredible occult scholar and author and in ceremonial magic circles and so forth. So lots of occult stuff this month, which is going to be a lot of fun. And then we're lining up our guests for August. We'll have more information on that coming up in a little bit. Just keep track of everything on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SAXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford it, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It really makes a difference, helps us cover our production cost a little bit. You can subscribe to our newsletter as well. And we just love having you guys here. So I'm not going to take up too much time because I know that this is a great guest and a fascinating topic and lots to cover. So I'm going to kick it back to you, Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to add one thing about Dad's show. He's going to be talking more about the FBI and the CIA potential involvement in Oswald this time. So to follow up on the first show. So anyway, back to our show today. Welcome, Brandy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me back again. I had so much fun the first time, and I'm really excited to talk about this subject.
We are so happy to have you, honestly, and I think it's so cool. Here's actually the book for those of you watching The Woman Magician. Here's my copy of it, which I bought probably when it came out, which was, what, a decade ago?
10 years ago, yep. This 10-year anniversary, yep.
So why did you decide to write this kind of a book?
Well, I've always been a gender questioning person, and moving into magic, I looked to magic, to witchcraft, and to ceremonial magic to give me power. But the roles of women were restrictive, just like the roles of women in culture were restrictive. And so I started questioning that and working with other people who were questioning that. When I was very young, I was a teenager, I belonged to a group that would talk to each other. We called ourselves the Feminist Kabbalist Collective. And we said, we always wanted to write a book called The Feminist Adept. I said, and when the group broke up, I said, I will do this. So it must have been 20, 30 years later that I said, it's time to write this book. It took me 10 years to write. So it took a while because they're really big concepts, but I just had great fun with it, and I'm really happy that it exists.
Well, I'd like to mention the structure of the book itself is also really unique, and you talk about that. I know in the book you talk about it being a 3-step movement of women's initiation that Carol Lee Flinders describes. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you came to that structure?
Yeah, her book is really lovely, and I read it continually as I worked on this book. There's this idea that you withdraw and transform and emerge, and this sort of cycle is what powers the book and what powers women's magic. And I really love that. I really love that concept and that way of doing it. So I would do retreats. Writing the book, I would go book a cabin somewhere and then do a piece of the book. And then I would come out in the world and I would talk to other people about what I was doing. And that interaction of going in and creating and then coming out and working with other people is what kind of drove the conversation. And I'll say one more thing about that too. While I was writing this book, I also edited the when I was doing the final, it wasn't 10 years, doing the final write of this book, the final draft, I edited a book called Women's Voices in Magic. So I went to every woman that I knew that had something to say that I had really appreciated and made her write it.
I bet that was challenging.
So mad at me. They're like, you made me write. It was wonderful because I generated this community of women who were all using our voices, and I was using my position to be able to augment that. And I'm really, really proud of that work.
So maybe briefly, it might be helpful to describe exactly what, you do tackle in the book. Like, I mean, you tackle a lot, but there's definitely sort of an emphasis on certain things and that you seem to draw in history and ritual and your own experiences, but you definitely have in the different sections it seems like some clear intentions.
Yes, and the way the book proceeded was that I would do a little invocation, and a spirit would come to me and guide me through that section. So I put the invocation at the beginning of each of the chapters. So I invoked Lady History, Lady Tradition, Lady Culture, Lady Magic, essentially, and each of these pieces illuminated another step on the path. It's basically an extended poetic look at how we think about gender in the magical traditions, in the Western magical traditions. And then the first point that I made is that I'm a witch and a ceremonial magician, and these things are related. You can dive into witchcraft and do that your whole life, and there are specific things to do with witchcraft. And you can dive into ceremonial magic and do that your whole life, and there's specific lines that you do. But they're all based on this substratum of magical understanding. And part of that substratum is gender. And so what I was doing was pulling out the gender piece and examining that and saying, how does this work? How does it empower us, and how does it restrict us, and what are the aspects of that? And so that was kind of the whole point of the book. But I looked at it in these different ways. Gender is physical, biological. So Lady Science came in and talked. Lady History came in and talked and gave me some books because she would. Lady Culture came in and said, gender is a performance. So and it's really fun too to look at it, because the conversation 10 years ago, this was really new. Now this is something that people are talking about, and it's become much more part of the general conversation. So I'm really excited about where our culture is going, that we're starting to assimilate some of these concepts.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I was looking through the book again. I have a couple of areas I wanted to look at specifically, but I realized you really were ahead of yourself with this book in a sense, and it's actually even more timely now. I really liked, and I'd bookmarked it, there's a little section called "The Magician is a Man." And I just liked that whole little, there's a couple pages long. And there was one quote I'll start with is from that is, when the magician is imagined in a body at all, the body possesses a phallus. If a woman means to be a magician, she stands in the place of a man as a man. And when I read that, I was like, how come I never really noticed that? and I mean, I didn't do a lot of ceremonial magic, but I did do some, but it was like so obvious. And I love how you delve into that in detail and how you could remake that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about that even now.
Yeah, and I think you might not have done so much time with the Lima and Ordo Templi Orientis. It's very gendered, and there's the main ritual, the star ruby, requires you to say, soi o phalloi. And there's a whole huge conversation in the thelemic community about how the phallus is the organ of regeneration. It doesn't necessarily mean phallus like penis. And all the women, that I talked to, many women say, nope, it means penis. I should acknowledge that, right? So it was very clear to me in doing this magic that I was required to stand in a man's body. That in the Ordo Templi Orientis, which I'm not a current member, but I respect and support, right? So I don't mean to sound critical. This is just my experience, right? But I was asked to call myself a man of earth. And there was a moment that I thought, this is actually inducing gender dysphoria for me. I'm not a man, right? So how do I navigate that? And that was part of what really drove this me to write this book in that time period when I was really active in the OTO. So that's why. But it's interesting because I talked to Golden Dawn people. I would go to Pantheacon and sit with the Golden Dawn women and talk about this, and they would say, that doesn't really happen for us. Golden Dawn magic, it's lots less in front of you that the person, the default person is a man. It is built into the system, but it's much less so. And part of the reason is that there's not so much emphasis on sex. In general, that sex magic kind of belongs to the thelemic community, and the Golden Dawn was really sort of the people who made the Golden Dawn were less sexual. Mathers and his wife Moina Mathers didn't have sex, so it made less difference to them than it did to the rest of us.
Well, it's interesting too. When Aleister Crowley and his sort of reputation with the women in his life, one of the things that's happening is they're getting more credit now. Like there's more research going on. And honestly, he gives them some credit, like particularly some of his Scarlet Women, things wouldn't have happened without them. The Book of the Law would not have happened. And the fact that he gave Lady Frida Harris, who he didn't have sex with, really praised her in the Book of Thoth was actually really amazing for Crowley. And also for that time that I think he evolved over his life into a better person in that way. And that's how I was introduced to him as an older Crowley. Like I went backwards, I saw the deck. That was the first thing I ever learned about him. But the fact that
you have to work back from that for sure.
Yeah. So, and that's this thing I really love the most about his work is the deck, and that she was equally part of it. So that was kind of a different kind of sex magic he evolved into, where that they're creating something together, a child, and they didn't have sex. And so maybe if Crowley came back in another body, which I suppose he could, maybe he would redo some of this ritual now. Maybe he would evolve into the next, evolution of himself, because he was also a man of his time. You can't really blame some of those men for those periods, and also because he was bisexual and all that. But the other thing I did like in bringing up Crowley was that you talk about the formula in his mass and how you can change that, the mother into the mother becomes the daughter, and these are things that seem like they could do today. Like, why wouldn't they be able to accommodate it? It's still really part of the ritual. You're not really changing the intention of the ritual, or but I know it's hard with people wanting to keep to rituals that were created by people, and when do you innovate, when do you not, what do you keep, what do you say that's not really helping these people, but it seems like that's some of that, if they wanted to, they could start at least having for women to feel more included in the rituals.
It's interesting too, because in writing about the Mass in a book-length work, I'm the only woman who's written about the Gnostic Mass in a book-length work. There are a few essays out there, but generally, if you're gonna read about the Gnostic Mass, I'm it. And I one of my ongoing messages to my sisters out there doing the Mass is, please write. Because I get quoted, I get people, academics quote my work, and this is one person's analysis. It's a knowledgeable analysis, but I'm not a ninth degree. I'm not one of the people who keeps the Mass as a ritual. So I really think that women do need to write about that. but as I toured the country, like the last 10 years, talking to people, the people who are gender questioning in the thelemic community would come to my workshops and say, I'd really like to be able to switch roles in the Mass. I'd really like to see the Mass evolve. And there are two sort of directions that goes. The first direction is that the institution of Ordo Templi Orientis is responsible to keep this ritual. So they keep the ritual. The ritual is going to go as it was written. But there's a lot of innovation. There are a lot of people who are writing new rituals. And there's just a ton of different versions of the Mass and different kinds of what are called sacramental rituals, right? So I think there is a lot of exploration and a lot of pushing. And I also think that in the next generation of magicians, the magicians who I was talking to, who are the younger magicians, they're going to come forward and do new rituals. I wrote a Mass.
Why not?
The Mass of the Priestess, right?
Yeah.
And it's available on my website, and I would go to festivals and do it. So there's a lot of exploration of the idea of priest and priestess and of the Gnostic Mass. I think all of these things are important. I think that's where the book went, right? Mm-hmm. Lady Tradition at the beginning, I went, Lady Tradition, this has got to change. And at the end, Lady Magick came along and said, yes, we're going to change this. And then Lady Tradition and I went to a bath, and she said, there's something to tradition. And I came back to, it's important. It's important to keep the tradition as well as to welcome innovation. I like both things.
Yeah.
I like adding, right? So you keep what you've got, and then you add new things to that. So the people who come after us can understand where this came from. The Mass is still performed as Crowley wrote it. And also there are the new things that meet our needs as we evolve as a culture and as magicians.
Now, what's interesting about history and the Golden Dawn is there were really, in a way, more noticeable and well-known women magicians. You have Diane Fortune, you have Florence Farr, and Morna Mathers, and they were, in a way, I can't call out by name a woman magician right now. Like they were known more in that circle, and they also, I think they're also getting a little bit more credit too. But what happened? It started out well with women really being equal. I mean, in the magical world, and that's one reason I also like that period, is because women were practicing magic with men when we're at a time where a lot of groups didn't have men and women mixing.
Yes.
So that was really very feminist type thing, if you think about it, and Diane Fortune had a lot of respect in her life, and she called herself a magician. And so I wonder, in some ways, I mean, I know the archetype of the witch is very, very powerful, and I'm glad on some level, because I would say maybe I identify with that a little stronger, but I go in and out of like wanting to do a little more with magic. But I want to get back to that point you were saying about making women right in magic. And I really agree with you. I haven't even written about things I know a lot about from my own experience in the tarot. And I said, why haven't I done that? I said, well, in some ways what I want to write, I know there's not really any role models for it. I'm not a scholar, but I know a lot experientially about the tarot. I've literally worked with it for 20 years as my full profession. and I said, so it's going to be a different kind of book for me. But I am curious, because even like you're right about with the Crowley people, it's like you always see male authors writing about Crowley even now. And I always keep wondering, so, well, there must be women in there. Why aren't they writing a little book about something related, and whereas you'll see in witchcraft, you see a lot of women writing, they're which is great. They feel free to write, and they're supported. And I said the more ceremonial, esoteric, magical world does seem still very masculine with writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, and I encourage women to write. I think it's hard to write book length projects. Being as a person who's only done 5 in 20 years, that's really hard. Mm-hmm. It's a long, but I encourage you to write. It's one of the reasons that I did an anthology of just essays. Like if you have one thing to say and you can say it in 5,000 words, I will put that into print. And so that's one of the ways that we can get women in print. There's the Llewellyn book called The Complete Book of Ceremonial Magic that was edited by 2 Thelemic Men by Lon Milo Duquette and David Shoemaker. And they went out of their way to find women magicians to write biographies of women magicians.
Oh.
And I'm really proud of that. I'm really happy that they did that. So you see both things. You see the historical women, and you see the women today who are writing and innovating in the field. And I have a piece in it too. They came and got me. And it's actually my favorite piece. It's called The Future of Ceremonial Magic. And it is the best thing I've ever written. I'm really, really proud of it.
Wow, I didn't know that about that book. That's great that you told me. I know that came out, the last year or something, that particular book?
The Big Purple.
Yeah, the Big Purple one.
Big Purple book, yeah. It is. And I want to say too that women's communities in general, but OTO in particular, in the 20 years that I was involved, it really evolved and had women's conferences. So women would be encouraged to come and present and write papers. And that builds the infrastructure to build up women's writings. So I continue to encourage my sisters to go write.
Another thing you mentioned in the book that I really liked was the idea that you just wanted to be in magic. You wanted to be your own person. You didn't want to be like, the muse, the wife. And honestly, that even exists somewhat in witchcraft a little bit. Like the idea of me, I totally connected with that concept. I've been trying to figure out, how can I just be me? Like, I don't want to just be Krista the wife, or Krista who's sexy, or Krista who's the supporter. How do you just be Krista, And I love that you were struggling with that idea. And I'd like to know what you think about it now, because I definitely still struggle with that a little bit. Just and how also people will sometimes, of course, put you in that position, because you remind them of something, So how do you work with that?
Oh, yeah. When I was younger, I wrote a book about sex magic. And I would aspect the goddess at festivals, and men would come to me and say, "Oh, you were so beautiful." I'm like, it was the goddess. It wasn't me, right? But there is that sense that you get that beautiful, inspirational, sexy kind of thing projected on you. And I just realized, and this is a fun conversation, I just realized that when I wrote this book, I was still menopausal. I am now postmenopausal. Mm-hmm. And that shift happens in what happens to women. So women who are postmenopausal then drop out. We become invisible. We're no longer interesting because we are no longer, projecting that sexy, inspirational, lovely image. And we're only interesting, actresses are only interesting insofar as they can still look young. So what happened for me at that moment was that other women came more sharply into focus. And I have a completely different set of conversations now with women who have gone past menopause. Mm-hmm. That is, it's very interesting. I'm going to have to put that, in the next iteration of the book for sure. Mm-hmm. So now I feel, so postmenopausal women have a lot more agency, partly because we drop back. The male gaze is no longer projecting that sexy thing on us. Mm-hmm. We become invisible, but that means that we can do our own work. So I can actually be a person again. I feel a lot more like a person who can do my own work like a man does now that I'm no longer like inhabiting that sexy position. And I like it a lot. A lot of women are frightened of that because there's power in it. There's power in projecting sexuality, and that's what gets you noticed. Mm-hmm. And it's scary to lose that. But on the other side of it, there's this sense that I can now do my work without being interfered with, and I really like that.
Yeah, I like that too, but I don't want anyone even to peg me as a crone. I don't like labels at all anymore. I said, I don't want to nurture you if I don't want to. Just because I'm older doesn't mean I'm your mother or grandmother. Just go away. That's how I feel. Like I only have so much time now. Whereas when I was younger, maybe when I was first into the goddess, I loved the triple goddess idea, and now I'm like, I don't know. I just want to be whatever I want to be at whatever age. If I feel like a teenager at 70, I'm going to act like it, and that idea that to me, I still feel like people can peg women with that too. And like just assume like certain things about you. But I agree with that. You don't, it is a relief. And especially if you hang out with someone that's still in that kind of sexy period and you see some of the stuff they go through with some icky attention, you're like, oh, thank God I don't have that, and,
I got wolf whistled on the street and I looked at this boy. He was like a teenager. I think he mistook me for someone younger and he just blushed beet reds. And this is why men are afraid of postmenopausal women, because we embarrass them.
Yeah, we just, no more nonsense, It's
Yeah.
like just.
But, it's Robert Graves. Graves has a lot to answer for doing the maiden mother crone thing. And my friend Lasara Firefox Allen wrote a book called Jailbreaking the Goddess, where she said, let's stop thinking about maiden mother crone and think about how the goddess moves in the world. And so she talked about different aspects of the goddess. And when she did the release of her book, we put an ad for Woman Magician in it, to try to promote that idea that the goddess is more than just these three aspects. And we can map out onto more than just the cycles of fertility in the goddess.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's about, right? Maiden is like pre-sexual. Mother is like, oh, she's now having babies and is sexual. And crone is like, she's no longer sexual. And that doesn't map out onto my experience at all.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Yeah, actually, and some people, I think that when they get older, especially that menopausal period, they get actually heightened sexuality, depending on what they had before. I was reading about this, like women that had given a lot during their life would tend to withdraw more sexually because they needed that energy. And then there were other women that were expelling that energy more. They were just getting really kind of, maybe they never had, and so I think it's good to not sort of have these sort of limitations. And also that leaves out, I feel like the maiden mother crone, when I think about it, does leave out the warrior woman, which is kind of the spirit that I relate to probably the most as a person, but in my own way too, because I sometimes follow these warrior books, and some of them I agree with and some of them I don't, but I'm a warrior, so I'm going to argue.
That's awesome. Durga. Yeah. Another thing that's happened in the 10 years since I wrote the book is that I've become a student of Sri Vidya and a tantric practitioner. And the image of the goddess is so different. And it's extant, for one thing. I mean, you go to India and people are worshiping the goddess everywhere. But there's mother never means someone who is physically mothered a child. The goddess is called Ma because she's the mother of everything. And there are so many aspects, but Durga has three aspects, right? She has the aspect of Kali, the destroyer. She has the aspect of Lakshmi, who's the traditional, sexy, but also has a lot of power. She has fertility. And then Saraswati, who's the word and speech. And all of these things are just so empowering. They're a whole different way of looking at women's energy and goddess energy. And I think it's a very fruitful place for women to explore in the West. So I wonder, have you met Durga? Have you met the goddess Durga?
No, not Durga. No, not really. I've more worked with like the Morgan. So because of my Irish background, so that's like the more fierce. But we were talking about the 21 Taras, and at some point I'll probably be more interested in sort of the wrathful Tara. So that is probably one reason I always did relate to Tara, because she has so many aspects, and the 21 Taras, I've tried to do some research with these very difficult books on Tara, but I didn't realize there's so many more Taras, and then trying to figure out which white Tara is which white Tara, and the depth of her history is just so vast, but I always liked that she had such a multi-dimensional energy,
And none of them are maiden mother crone, not one.
No, you're right. None of them are maiden mother crone.
Yeah.
Though I was thinking, after reading, I was thinking about, your thoughts about as a woman envisioning yourself as a man. And then I thought, well, what's interesting is that a lot of male lamas, they love the Tara practice. And I thought, I wonder how they feel. They must like it, that they envision, because Tara is, a very female presence, even though she can have a wrathful look, and then there's the one where she's in union, but it just made me think about how popular Tara is with the male lamas, and how maybe they like to envision themselves that way. Like it's just curious. I'm gonna have to ask one of them sometime. But let's get on to and spend a little time with your latest book. It's a really cool book too, Cord Magic, because it's one of those magics, and she's holding it up for those of you who can see. It's a really nice cover too. I love all the curly cues.
I love the cover. It's just so beautiful.
It really is. String, yarn, twists, and knots. And it seems like once you get into any kind of practice with witchcraft, there's always something about cord magic, but it seems to be less popular than, say, candle magic in popular culture. Do you think that's true? That more people know about like candle magic, or is it because people that make candles promoted it, the retail of it, which is not bad?
No, it's good. And actually, I wrote another book. This is my bestseller, Practical Magic for Beginners. And basically, it's all candle spells. But it also talks about the foundations of magic and how you come to build your own ritual for your own purpose. And that's what chord magic does too. It does the same thing for chords. I talk about number and color and timing and putting all of those things into a spell that just uses a little bit of yarn and then sets that intention. I find that when I talk to people about chord magic, that everybody knows that chord magic exists, but the only thing that people really know to do is the 9-knot spell. And I said, oh, there's so much more you can do with chords. It's so much fun. So I wrote an entire book about it to sort of expand people's horizons. And I think it's going to, I think it's going to be popular. There's another book, Llewellyn has another book coming out called Fiber Magic. A Woman Who Knits is talking about doing that as a magic too. And I talk a little bit about knitting and other ways of making chords in chord magic. So I think it's starting to be more popular. It's clear that there's a need for explanations about this.
Yeah, and I'm curious, do you know much about the history, like where it started or why it, what is behind the, I was thinking, does it connect to sailing because of all the ropes and knots or anything? And I know sailors can be superstitious, or where does it really come from?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'll try to limit my answer here. But I wrote a little chapter on history. Chord magic is as old as people. The essential way to make a chord twists two threads together and then bends them back on each other so they form a solid link. And that's something that the Neanderthals taught Homo sapiens. I mean, it's hugely old. And we continue to find little traces of chords and dyes in caves and things. So we've been doing chord magic as long as we're human. And there's lots and lots and lots of examples of chord magic all over the world. And everybody knows something. I mean, I bet you know at least one chord magic that you can talk about. Everyone knows about the red chord, the Kabbalah chords.
Yes.
That yeah. So yeah, it's really, really old and it's a foundational magic, actually.
And so can you give maybe like a little example of something from your book as to an example of using chord magic that people might not know about?
I talk about the ways that the reasons that people use magic, and there's really over time, over culture, there are just a few fundamental human needs that we turn to magic for. We turn to magic for protection. We turn to magic for health. We turn to magic for love. Those are really the things that we look to magic for. And you can make a chord to set an intention for any of those things. So I've got an entire chapter on intentions, how you build them, and then you just twist the chord saying a thing that you want. An example is my husband is in a wheelchair, so I still have to do this. I intend to make him a chord that builds in protection for him in the wheelchair so that he's safe in the wheelchair, and also for his continued health. And I will pick the right colors, so I'll probably use green for healing and perhaps red for protection, and twist those into the chord and wrap it around his wheelchair. I've done this for a lot of people who are older, and they really appreciate having something that they can look at and say, oh, look, someone loves me and wants me to be healthy and protected.
That's really cool. Yeah, you're right. Something physical reminds them of it. And of course, it has your energy in it too, which I totally believe is important, people's energy and things. And so one of my other questions was, once you're done with the chords, do you just let them disintegrate on their own, or are there certain things you do according to the magic? Because I mean, one of the things in magic that I've often really struggled with is how to sort of get rid of things that were magical objects, or you want to be environmentally correct. You want to make sure that it's done in a magical way. So is that part of your chord magic book?
Yeah, if you're going to make magic, you have to deal with the issue of disposal.
Yeah.
You just have to. And I can't tell you how many chords I've found that I'm like, what was that for? I don't really know what that was for anymore. It has clearly done its use. So you can do a little cleansing where you take the energy off of the fabric and then take the fabric and put it into something that you're recycling. Goodwill takes cloth and recycles it into rags. And so I give them old clothes, and I just take my old chords once I've stripped the energy off of them, and I put them in the Goodwill bags, because they're usually small. This one's a chord I made for an air protection. So it's pretty small. So I would cut it, open the energy and strip it of its energy, and then put the threads themselves into the Goodwill recycle. And thank you for thinking about that, because it's a hard thing to figure out what to do. And these are so easy to make. They're so simple. Right. You can make them for so many purposes. You can end up, as I have done, with like lots.
That's nice. That's like for people that are listening, it's like a yellow, almost braided kind of looking shorter cord. It looks really, really nice. I love the color. Now, have you gone through different phases with what kind of material you like to use and experiment? And do you find like certain things work better in terms of just working with it, because obviously it's tactile and all that?
Yeah, and when I was writing the book, I actually stopped and took a year off because I encountered the ethics of fabric, and they're very difficult. You can grow your own food. I know a lot of people who do that locally, grow at least part of their own food, and some people who only eat what they grow. It's impossible to do that with fabric. Fabric was why we had the Industrial Revolution, because people could only grow enough, or they could only make one or two outfits for their lifetimes. So we now have really cheap fabrics that we can just change as we like. But it has a huge environmental impact on plants and on animals. So for cord magic, I thought about this. I wrote like 30,000 words on the ethics of fabric, stopped and said, let's just say a few things about this. For your cord magic in particular, you're only going to use a little amount. And so you can go to a yarn store and find a wool that has a picture on it of the sheep that actually gave the wool and what farm it's from. And that's a really ethical way to build your cord magic. So you can, since you're using very small amounts of fabric, you can afford to get the really expensive fibers. And so it just depends on what you like. I use synthetics. I use a lot of, this one's a synthetic. The yellow one is actually acrylic because it's made from cellulose byproducts, which is actually a way to use them up. And also the other advantage of this is that I can take it and I can wash it. So wool, if you put it in the washing machine, it will felt. So you can't wash them. So I make a lot of things out of acrylic because I can just wash them. So there's a whole chapter in the book about how you can look at what you would like to, what the qualities of fibers are, and then you can choose whatever fiber speaks to you. And I don't make any judgments. Whatever choices you make are your choices. In terms of fiber, we've got a lot of difficult choices. So whatever you do is fine.
Yeah, it's the more you look into the ripple effect of everything, it becomes almost impossible not to do some harm, So the way I do it is I'm as conscious as I can possibly be. And then I also have the intention in my mind to someday do more if I'm not capable. This is all I'm capable of. I say, well, someday I'm going to be capable of more. That's how I know I have limitations in a sense. And but it becomes quite tricky, like with sage now. And for me, it has to do with crystals. Like I've been thinking a lot more about how crystals are harvested. Should we be taking any more or not? I mean, I don't know. I'm asking these questions. And sometimes the caves are more beautiful that you go to visit. If you go to visit because the idea that everything has, in my mind, consciousness, and we're disrupting the crystal beings, or if we want to call it. And I don't have a lot of crystals, but I never thought about that when I first bought them. Now I do. So I haven't really been buying any, but I don't judge people. I just, this is me. This is my own journey with it,
That's right.
I want to be, I think magic in general and spirituality, one of the ways you can see you're growing is you really do become more aware of ripple effects in your own world. Like, wow, what if I go buy fabric, what's happening here? And that's one way to sort of analyze if you're actually having an effect, is that you yourself expand in your awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that that's really true. And one thing that I talk about in the book, too, is asking people to make their own decisions about things. So I give examples for what color meanings are, but I also give charts that list out colors and say, what's the meaning for you? Now that you know your meaning, you can choose that in the cords that you make. So I'm a very big proponent of finding out what things mean to you and making space for people to have their own experience of magic.
Well, and that's going back to the idea a little bit of sort of tradition versus like, your own experience. And I was thinking about the fact that we're putting together like the Cord Magic book and the Woman Magician. I said, well, in a way, Cord Magic is a very feminine energy naturally. If you think that, generally speaking, you'll see there are more women that knit and use yarn, and not to say that men don't now or that they don't want to. And so it has a natural, except for when I was thinking about sailors. I was like, well, they have the knots. And I remember trying to learn in climbing all the different difficult knots.
Oh, yeah.
And I was not good at it, but I was really like envious of people that would make all these really beautiful knots. Like, how'd they do that? And to me, that was kind of magical at the time. And it was, when you're climbing, you definitely want to know how to do knots, right? Yeah. So maybe that's kind of a masculine version of cord magic.
And for this culture too, women knit and women sew. In other cultures, I've traveled the world, and there are places where only women weave, or there are places where only men weave. And the men will like, women can weave? I'm like, yeah. It really varies from culture to culture.
Oh, that makes sense too. So would weaving be part of cord magic? Like if you were into like weaving, and or is that something that you could, do in terms of just the actual act of weaving as a magical
I'll show you this
act?
one. I made this as this is a 4 square, like it's just the 4 elemental squares, and I made it on a little hand loom. They sell them they're called peg looms, and it's a great way to use up your ends of yarns. Use weaving and knitting in your cord magic. In cord magic, I describe a way to make a cord that takes about a minute. And I described it to you a little bit. You twist the cord and then fold it back on itself. And I also have a video on my YouTube channel, brandywilliamsauthor.com. There's a YouTube video that shows it to you. I also described it in the book, and it took me, it's the most complicated thing to write. It's like, how do you take something that's so simple and describe it, right? But yeah, so you can set your intention in anything that you knit or anything that you weave. Cord magic, the thing I love about doing this little twist thing that makes rope, that makes string, is that you can do so many of them and do them so quickly. I mean, it takes me 4 or 5 hours to knit a hat. So when I start the knitting, I set the intention, this is going to be a hat, and it's a warm hat to keep my friend warm. And then I watch TV. 5 hours of knitting is a long time to keep an intention.
Oh, for sure. And well, I think you can relax. One of the things I personally experience with when I do an intention in life is if I put it out and really let it go completely out of my mind, it has more of an effect. If I try to like kind of push it more, like I keep thinking and keep thinking. And I think there are different techniques for magic, but maybe because of my astrology, that particular technique works the best for me, like because I have a lot of water. And we were talking about the elements, and someone had asked me, because they also are Cancer, if they should live by water. And I was like, yes, you should. It's true. You do love water if you're a water sign. I mean, at least I have found I swim, I take long baths, I like just being by water. It makes me just feel like me, and of course you can do it if you lack it too, but you might not be initially comfortable, I would think. So maybe different types of magic, different, because I think there are things that people just concentrate and it works for them to create it. But I don't know why, it just works better for me if I just completely let it go. Once I put it out, the intention, I just forget about it, So it probably depends on your, how you work as a person. But yeah, keeping that intention that long, I don't know. Maybe one of those llamas could do it because they do such long meditations, Yeah. So now with the cord magic, is it something that you think in terms of the effect, is it good to wear it or carry it, or does it matter depending on the what you're doing with it? You could hang it nearby, or what is your experience with that?
Yeah, and you're starting to explore that is what cord magic is about. As I talk to people about it, I find that it sparks people's creativity. Like, oh, you know what I could do with it? I could. So this one, I've been making a set of cords to just put in my house as elemental wards, so I can put it on the wall. And I went to the park with my group. Isis Nepthys Temple of Sisters of Seshada started to meet again. We're meeting in the park, and we're about to start another whole set of the initiations. And so I showed them cord magic, and women made cords and then wrapped them around their wrists. I see my sister again last week, and she's still wearing it, right? So that was cool. Or I could take this one and I could put it in my pocket. One thing I like to do is I will make a cord for protection and put it around something. Like I can make a protection for my luggage and then put it around my luggage handle. And it serves two purposes. It protects the luggage, and also as it comes off the luggage.
Ah, you can see it.
The baggage thing, you can see it. Yeah, it's like, oh, there's mine. Yeah. Yeah. So there are lots of ways that you can. I'm wearing this string for the pendant is a cord that I made to talk about cord magic. Actually, it gives me the sort of energy of teaching. And when I put it on, I'm like, okay, now I'm talking about cord magic, and then I can take it off and go off and be some other Brandy, which is very helpful.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things too. In magic, it's nice to have something to do sometime. Like one time I took, just for fun, I took a course with someone who taught us how to make our own shields. It wasn't like a really complicated one. And it was so much fun to actually do something together in a group that was crafty. Because, you know, like for me, a lot of ritual is the mind and maybe the body, but to actually do something and that would be available for at least, a lot of people could do cords. Like it's not difficult, it sounds like.
Yeah, my husband can't use his hands so well anymore, so he'd have trouble with it. But he can hold an end while I make the cord with him. Mm-hmm. So almost anyone can. You can attach it to them if they can't move. Otherwise, if you can move your hands, that's all it takes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is fun. It's really fun to go out with your friends. I've done a lot of workshops where I just buy a whole lot of not expensive yarn and throw it out to the group and show them how to do it and say, okay, go make cords, and watch people fill a meadow and just make cords with each other. It's just fun.
I love it. Now, you recently just put this book out, and you are going to re-release a version of The Woman Magician. You said it was going to be the 10th anniversary this year. When will that be?
So this book, you said it was ahead of its time, and I think it was actually. I mean, it went out and it went out of print relatively quickly. So it's physically really not available. Llewellyn does this really great thing. They're very, very clean about it when they take a book out of print. So I have 2 books in print with them and 2 books out of print. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they give me all of the rights back, including the ebook. This is all yours. And they give me the option to buy the print run. So with Love of the Gods, I wanted that book, and I bought the print run, and it's in it's in a storage unit. With Woman Magician, there was an error in the book. I had misquoted another writer, and I didn't want to push that forward in time. So I let them go ahead and shred that. And so what I want to do with it is issue a 10th anniversary ebook. It gives me a chance to go back over the material. And I think you're right. I think it's more the time that the book can kind of find its audience. People have picked it up like you did and go, oh wow, that was a great book. I read that a while back. But there are a lot of things that are in the news that are in this book now. So I'm very excited about reissuing it and talking about the conversations I've had with people in the 10 years since it came out and how our idea of gender has changed.
Yes, a lot, especially just the last couple years, I would say. The conversation, at least publicly, the conversation is really getting very interesting. I did want to mention that Dawn Hubbs said that your book The Woman Magician is amazing. She's on our chat. And so thank you for contributing that thought.
Yay. I get so excited when people read it. It's a labor of love, this one.
Well, it has a lot of ritual in it, too. That's there is quite a bit of ritual actually in it as well. And so I think that can be really useful right now too. And like I said earlier, when we were talking earlier, I don't think anyone has even now done something like this. So that's why it's going to be, I think it could be a classic in some ways, just because of you really do cover a lot of ground in it, very well, I thought, so it's a very thorough, interesting, but also, well, you know how it is with metaphysical books. Sometimes the writing isn't so great, and the information is. That's why I really like Dionne Fortune. I like her writing, but it's not always the case. I'm like making myself read this. Like, I know I need this, but so it's nice when you can read, a book well. It's a well-written book. Those seem to be 2 different skill sets, because.
And I laugh because I'm an editor too. I edit people's books, and it can take a lot to bring a book-length project to something that. And it's not like the first draft of my books, some of my books have not been so great, right? It takes a village. It takes editors to help you bring the book to where it was. And my editor, Alicia Gallo at Llewellyn, she really helped shape Woman Magician and Love of the Gods. She really did a great job with it. I wanted to talk about the ritual. I said there was something you said that I wanted to come back to. So at the end of the book, Lady Magick creates a magical order called the Sisters of Seshat, which is a sororal order rather than fraternal of brothers. This is an order of sisters of Seshat, who's the Egyptian Kemetic goddess of writing and language. And I wrote a series of initiation rituals. So I have a temple, the Isis Nephthys Temple of Sisters of Seshat. And it's in its fourth iteration, I think now. We like come together and do the rituals, and then everybody goes home because there are 5 rituals. So, you can work through them. And there are no prerequisites. I really love this about this. There are no prerequisites. You don't have to like sign up. You don't have to give anybody money. You don't have to have done a certain study. You just do them. And women can come together and do them in a bootstrap. You can like act as an officer, and then you can go through the initiation. That's how we started it. Now I'm the Sisters of Seshat Isis Nephthys Temple is now working on a group initiation version. So we have 3 officers who have gone through the rituals, and I'm writing a version where we take all the candidates and do them simultaneously instead of one at a time.
Oh.
I did that at Pantheacon. I did it at a pagan festival. I did the moon initiation, and I had like 30 women. There were 3 of us officers, and we just took them around and did the initiation. And so it lets the powers move through you, and then you can have that experience. So I'm going to put that in the next iteration of the book, and I think that might help people do it. Other groups have taken it up and worked to do it, but it's a bit of a commitment to take 3 women or 5 women or 7 women sequentially through 5 initiations. It's a lot.
It is. That is a lot.
Right. Yeah. So I know, having done it, right. So I'm working on simplifying that, but I really love it because when we get into the temple, it's just a different way of working when all of the voices are women's voices. It's just really fun. I want to say too about the rituals that anybody who identifies as a woman can do them. There aren't any restrictions around that either. So when I did the moon initiation at Pantheacon, there was a guard at the door, so people didn't walk in during the ritual, but I told the person who was guarding the door, anybody who wants to come in can come in. So it's a completely inclusive thing as well.
So what is your view, since we're talking about ritual and also modern times? It does seem like there are people, I think Lon was starting to do some ritual online, and initially because of the pandemic, but also I believe he thinks that there may be a good reason to be doing some initiations and ritual online versus in person. And so what is just your views about both, like right now? In person.
Ron Duquette was doing initiations online?
I don't know if it was initiations, it was a ritual, or we at least talked about maybe it's something that we should consider in the magical world for a variety of reasons. And it was, of course, instigated by pandemic. At least that's what I recall. Yeah. I know it was something he did some sort of a ritual with past life. Yeah, and he said it was very successful. And I mean, we were just, that's what I remember him talking about. And I thought it was an interesting idea. And again, mixing the idea of like tradition and innovation. And so where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, and during the pandemic, all of us had to go to really creative ways to handle that. And my coven, which met in person, one of us decided not to quarantine with us, so we had to go online. And so I wrote a whole version of the coven ritual that allowed us to be, and there were a lot of considerations about it. I wrote a Pathos blog about it, I think, so you can go look at it. My Pathos blog is Star and Snake, if you get interested in it.
Okay.
And I found that it was very effective to work online. And also the tantric teachers, I did a class with Lopan Chandra Easton of the Tara Mandala, where she did the white taras, and she would pass us the mantra initiation by speaking it live during a Zoom session. And my Sri Vigya teacher does Zoom sessions. That's how she works. And I've done a lot of mantra initiations with her there. So I know that they are very effective and very powerful. I think that we're just at the beginning of exploring that. And there may be another magical sense that allows us to connect through these mediums. But then people who are psychic, you know more about this than me, I'm sure. People who are psychic have connected across time and across space for a long time. It's just that the technology allows us to see each other while we're doing it, or listen to each other while we're doing it.
That's very true. I recently had the experience. I went to the Buddhist group that I go to occasionally, and they did a mix of Zoom and in person. And I personally didn't like the mix because you didn't know where to put your attention. Like if it was only Zoom, you'd just do your attention, your energy. And what I found was the energy was awkward. And it could also just be, you know, but I thought I kind of like one or the other. And maybe that's also because I have to, you know, figure out where I stand on Zoom and in person. And also, you know, I was sort of saturated with in-person teachings and so that made a big impression on me. So, but I think it does have, you can reach a wider audience, and also people that maybe it's not a pandemic. What if they're shut-ins? You know, what if they are isolated? What if in their community there's nothing like that, you know? So that's a consideration if you ask me. And so it's just an interesting time with all of this.
Yeah, and actually the pandemic made opportunities available to me that wouldn't have before. So there was a OTO body in Austria that was interested in bringing me over to Austria to present. And with the pandemic, they said, why don't we just put her on a Zoom session? And that was awesome. I got to present to that group, and it was an international audience. So it does make opportunities available. And I think that we should hang on to that. Yeah. I think that that's a really good thing, especially because we want to start easing up on our carbon footprint. Maybe we don't need to travel so much if we can do Zoom conferences. We don't have to put everybody in a hotel.
That's a good point, actually. I didn't think of that. Yeah, it helps because remember when Mother Earth was doing so well, when we were all shut down and everything was, animals were coming to open places and pollution was,
you could see the Himalayas again.
Yeah.
You know, when I went to India, I couldn't see them except from the airplane because they were shrouded in smog, and the Himalayas cleared out. So this is something that we want.
Yeah, no, I love that point. That's an excellent point, actually. I hope my only fear, and it's just a fear, is that some of the newer people, because I think if you've gone to in-person rituals, you're going to want to do that sometimes. My only fear is people never doing anything in person that can do it. Like they're just lazy.
Well, I can't believe I go to the park. I took my husband and to the park yesterday, and we're sitting and looking at the water, and there are all these cars sitting and looking at the water, and people are looking at their phones. Like, there's water.
Yeah, that's still an issue, that the addiction to the screen, you know, and believe me, I love screens. We have a show, but I don't have that addiction. I just grew up in a different time, so it's just easier for me. You know, it was awkward even to get involved in technology, but I do love a lot of it. So I have a different muscle that I built. You know, I come from a time where we had typewriters, so
Me too.
and I still have my typewriter, and you know, and letters. I still miss. I always go on about this. I miss letter writing.
Yeah, my yogini sisters and I send each other physical cards, and they're young too. So it hasn't left the world altogether.
No, cards are actually a good way to get into it because people generally love to get a card. I mean, at all ages, people will go on about that. So you're right. There are young people that like cards and letters too, but it's just a different world. You know, that's how it is. Who knows what it's going to be like in 50 years too. But so we're getting a little close to the end, and I just wanted to see if there's anything you wanted to sort of leave people with about magic, about your own thoughts about where things are heading, anything at all.
I think one of the things that I really hope people do is to continue to have hope for the future. As I was writing about the future of magic and talking to people, I know that people are very hopeless and feeling that there are huge consequences to the world that we can't fix. And I want to let us know that we have a lot of power personally and collectively, and continuing to focus on the positive things that we can do to move toward a future where the world recovers and that life recovers. I think that that's really important for all of us to keep in front of us for our own hope, and also to image that future together to make it happen.
I love that. That's actually a really good point, especially we're still sort of in some of the pandemic still, and there definitely was a lot of depression and more mental illness because of the isolation and the fear. And so magic can help us with all of that, and it's not fantasy. It really can, and as can spirituality. Now, people can reach you. Is the best place your website to reach you?
Yeah, brandywilliamsauthor.com will point you at all of my platforms. I'm on Facebook as Brandy Williams Author, on Instagram as Brandy Williams Author. The only outlier is the Pathos blog, Star and Snake. But if you put Brandy Williams Star and Snake, you'll get it. But I also blog regularly on my website, brandywilliamsauthor.com.
I did want to mention, I did look at the one you were, it was about writing, that you had the advice you gave. I read about 2/3 of it, and it was really helpful, actually. I wanted to tell you that. I didn't have time to look through the whole blog, but that one caught my eye for some reason. I said, oh, I'm going to read that one. And it was helpful. So I think that I would encourage people to check out your blog as well. I will just say, as a fan of The Woman Magician, so I bought this book before I ever met Brandy. I've only met her this year, and I like, I'm a big reader, and I just love it. It's just really very readable too, and I'm glad you're going to re-release it. I encourage anyone that's interested in anything with magic could benefit, but particularly anyone interested in understanding the women in magic and sort of what's been going on and the history and how we can, change things for the better for everybody, because it's going to be good for men too.
Thank you so much for having me, Krista.
You're most welcome. And thank you so much for coming back. And thank you all for listening in. We look forward to journeying with you more on our next episode. So stay safe, and we'll see you next week.